Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. Co-host today is Chris Rossini. Chris, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Very good. And today we're going to be talking about a subject that everybody thinks about all the time in different ways, and that is the subject of money. What is money? When did they invent this stuff? What's the relationship of money to governments? And what about in the periods of chaos during wartime or economic crises or things like this? Money becomes very, very important. And today there's a lot of discussion about money and its nature. People watch the price of gold. They look at the Federal Reserve note and what the federal government is doing, what the Federal Reserve is doing. And we talk about bubbles. So money is very, very important. The price of money, the interest rates. And then you have two ways of looking at this. Should the government run this and regulate it, or should it be determined by the marketplace? But you know, something that might help us think about this a little more clearly is what about where did we get this understanding of money? And the Austrian economists have actually done a little bit of this and talk about the origination of money, the regression theorem about exactly where monetary ideas and where money came about. And I know you've looked into this a little bit. Do you think there's much confusion today, or do you think they ought to look at the Austrian school and think, well, how do they define money? What is this all about?
Absolutely, and it may shock some people, but money is not a creation of government. The government didn't just one day say, "Here, take all these things and use them," and you have to use them. That's not how it started. Money was created freely in the marketplace through thousands and millions of transactions and over many years and centuries. So it was decided upon by people. Normally, what did they want to trade with? Instead of barter, they would decide on a medium of exchange that could act in their transactions as a medium of exchange. And this took place over thousands of years, and two rose to the top all the time, and that was gold and silver, for various reasons on why people trusted and used it in the marketplace. Well, government came in afterwards and monopolized it for itself, and we could already guess as to why they would want a monopoly of money. Government doesn't want the market to decide what money is, because people want sound money that can't be created on a whim. Well, government, if they monopolize it for themselves and monopolize its creation, they could finance whatever they want, all the welfare they want, all the warfare they want. That's what we have today. So gold and silver, they were a check on government, and it was the most powerful check. It was financial.
Right.
So we need to ultimately get back to that. And Dr. Paul, if you can please talk about the legislation that you submitted for competing currencies.
Yeah, I worked on this for a long time and thought that would be an answer, is to legalize the competition, because what's happened now is you describe how it was developed, and then governments get control, and the money morphs into something different than what is money in a natural way. It becomes fiat. It becomes it becomes dishonest, it becomes fraud, and then we have a Federal Reserve that actually prints money, and they are committing counterfeiting. If we did it, we wouldn't be allowed to do it. And because of this chaos and the witnessing of what happened when the system that was supposedly backed by gold, and then ever since the Federal Reserve, it undermined the value of the dollar, going from $20 an ounce up to as high as $1,800 an ounce, just because of the manipulation of it. And I think this is a reflection not of the unhappiness of a true, honest, metallic standard for money, but unhappiness with what our governments have done and our central banks have done, because they have caused the chaos. They have literally gotten licensed to print money and subsidize the welfare and the warfare state. And after the breakdown in 1971, when we declared bankruptcy and we would not exchange our dollars for gold internationally, already at that time the Americans weren't allowed to have gold anymore. When that happened, that ushered in a new age, which we're still living in, of total economic chaos. And some people benefiting and some people suffering, and causing the crisis we have today of maldistribution. The poor get poorer and the rich get richer, and you never can solve that problem with socialism. You got to solve it by the defects in the current system we have. So thinking about that, I thought, well, I don't like mandates. I don't like the government to come in and pass a law. I didn't come up and say, thou shalt do this, and this will be the way it should be, and this is how we're going to prevent it. I never said that government should never avoid having a definition of what a dollar is. As a matter of fact, that's the way the dollar started. The dollar started by a definition of weight of silver, and they were very interested in that because of the runaway inflation with the continental dollar. So my idea of the ultimate solution would be going back to how did money originate? In the marketplace. Let people sort it out. The gold standard was never perfect. Maybe modern times will invent other things and bring other things into lieu to use it. You know, we live in a different age. So the legislation I wrote was get the government out of the way, legalize competition, get rid of the monopoly, eliminate the legal tender laws. But then you had to do one more thing about allowing the market to work, is you can't tax it. You can't tax money, and yet that's what they do. If you say, well, you're allowed to own gold. Yeah, but if everybody follows all the rules, and a lot of people have to, because where you buy and sell gold, there are sales taxes on gold and silver, and then capital gains taxes. So quite frankly, the major part of that legislation was the repeal of legal tender laws. The monopoly of which you spoke, Chris, has to be repealed in order for the competition to work. And so this is what we're facing today. We see a new attempt at this, in spite of all the government regulations at all. Here are people coming up with a different coin. You know, it's called Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. And I find it interesting that, this has, this offers a lot of information to think about maybe the transition. But it's interesting they call it a coin. It's sort of a throwback that when real money was real money, you had a coin, you had something you could touch. But this is a little bit different. But I think there's a challenge going forward. Because I'm not sold on the fact that cryptocurrencies are back to the original intent of money. And it's not that it has to be that way, but I think by human nature that the market will sort of require that. But where my hesitation comes right now and what's happening is the fact that people are being taxed. Coinbase has just been asked for almost 15,000 records because they want to make sure the United States government collects enough taxes on this. And, everything is done on a computer. I thought we were complaining about computers. NSA knows everything we do on computers on our telephone. So is it anonymous? Right now, in my mind, I thought about money for a long time. If you want anonymity, and you have it between two people in a transaction, about the most anonymous thing you can do is say, hey, I owe you $1,000. Here's a coin, and that's it. Well, that's not very modern in the sense that it's not very efficient, but the whole thing is I would argue the case, Chris, that if we want true competition in money, and we should have it, the market would do a good job, and therefore the main goal is getting rid of the monopoly control of the monetary system. Unfortunately, every country has endorsed this system of central banking. And quite frankly, as soon as we get control of a country and we introduce them to the Western side of freedom, it's one thing they do. We tell them, you need an income tax and you need a central bank, and you need to listen to us about the value of their currency, and you will tie it to the dollar.
Yes, and back in 1870, I mean, they knew what they're doing is not it's not a good thing for everyone. U.S. Chief Justice Salmon P. Chase said the legal tender quality of money is only valuable for purposes of dishonesty. And that about sums it up. We have a very dishonest system because government can it could finance itself. That's, I mean, you never want something like that. It should be financed by its citizens, not finance whatever it wants, because it'll just grow ad infinitum. It won't stop, and that's what's happening. And we've lost control, of government because of that. With Bitcoin, for me, it's not easy to understand. Now, I know people do understand it, obviously, but for the average person to tell them that this currency is electronic and it's backed up by math, I don't know. I think holding a piece of gold is something that every single human can understand. And that's a major downside for me. And that's one reason why governments hate gold, is because they would have to come and physically take it from you. So cryptocurrencies, governments want them too, Dr. Paul, and you know the reason why for that.
All right. And when the cryptocurrency principle is accepted and usable, under today's conditions, it's going to be controlled by the government. There will be a cryptocurrency, and it will be, and I know the people who promote the cryptocurrencies believe, no, it can be always remain anonymous. But the first thing is when I ask people, well, how did you buy your cryptocurrency? Well, I called up this website. Oh, you used your computer. Oh, and then how did you pay for it? Credit card, and that's how you get involved. And so it is something that exists. I think that we get a hint on what the market would do if we had get rid of the legal tender laws and denationalize money, because it does happen. It happens in countries like Venezuela and other places. Venezuela, people are very well off if they happen to have a dollar, because the dollar is superb to what they have. But in other times, in war times, sometimes cigarettes were pretty good money, because it was definable and usable and sought after, divisible in small units, and people were able to do that, and there were no records kept of it, and that substituted for government money, because at the end of World War II, or in the 20s, when the German inflation came, their currency was destroyed. They would use other things. So tobacco has been used, alcohol has been used. During the early period of our history, when Washington and Alexander Hamilton orchestrated a war on a whiskey rebellion in western Pennsylvania, where I was from. They wanted to stop them using it because they weren't paying the tax, but they were using whiskey as money, under more primitive conditions. But they were happy with that, and they worked out a system. But they went to something real that they could see and touch and they can understand. Now, that doesn't mean that the computer is not going to be important. It doesn't mean that some of this stuff might work out okay. But I think that the biggest caution that I make is, be realistic about how ruthless governments are, and how determined central banks are, and how the deep state controls the financial system. Even those of us who believe in gold and think that gold should be money, we say, well, why don't you have a cryptocurrency backed by gold? Which has been attempted, and they're out there, and it would work. If it were truly a cryptocurrency backed by gold, it would move with the price of gold, not by the price of cryptocurrencies. So if they did that, people would realize that maybe you can use a cryptocurrency, but people want to see and touch something in order to use it. And I think that we have to be realistic how powerful they are. On gold, what can they do? I suggested that, if Chris and I exchanged an ounce of gold, we can do that and nobody would know. Well, more than half of my lifetime, Americans weren't even allowed to hold gold. From 1933 all the way up to 1975, Americans committed a vicious crime to own gold and get away with that. So governments can, even, let's say, for instance, let's say gold and silver historically has been pretty successful. Let's say that is the best money. It became absolutely illegal. And they say, well, that's been corrected. Since 1975, you can buy and sell gold, which is true. But let's say things get tough and there's a challenge to the dollar. Not only only do they put on controls on your money, controls on sending your money out of the country, what they'll do is they'll say, well, if you use gold and you try to do it, you will be watched. If people are accepting gold, or there will be gold companies and there will be coin companies, well, they might say, well, you're turning in a gold coin to get some money that you can spend at every store. They might say, well, there's an 80% tax on gold, or 50% tax. So they will do something like that. So even the gold standard is as good as it may well be and has been, because gold has been known to be useful and likable for 6,000 years, and actually used for money as early as 4,000 years ago. So it's tested, it's been tested over a long period of time. But even if that is the case, the ultimate test will be the political system. And that's why, though I have talked about money for a long time and the soundness of money, and why that is related to the undermining of our liberties and the promotion of wars and the destruction of our civil liberties, the truth is the ultimate protection that we have, that we should all be concerned about, is protecting our liberties. Having a government that would protect contracts, and if there are competing currencies, the government would have a role in that. Anybody who commits fraud, if they get up there and start counterfeiting and lying, yes, the government has done it. But people aren't allowed to do it. If there's a role for government, that's what it should be. They should, not allow counterfeiting and lying and fraud in money. But of course, we live in an age that's quite different. But I think that the ultimate goal for sound money and sorting all this out is get the government out of the way. Get rid of the legal tender laws. Let people study this and find out whether those of us who lean toward a commodities type money, which can be still used in a blockchain effect, but it would be different than being created out of thin air, which is fiat. You do that, it's still fiat. And somebody said, well, there's a limitation of fiat. Well, maybe they just develop a brother of one coin and have double the amount. So there's ways to get around it. But the big thing is legalizing freedom and having the government in a very limited role, and get rid of central banking. But you can't do that unless the people have a clear understanding of what liberty is all about, and why people can sort these problems out so much better than governments.
Yes, I agree totally. And Dr. Paul, I'll close by saying that in my mind, there's two things that government will fight to the death for. One is compulsory schooling, and two is the control of money. They will not give up either of those two things easily. But the more that people understand, and these are all workarounds, the fact that cryptocurrencies exist is great, because people are trying to get out of this matrix that has been created. And there's also homeschooling and the internet for education. So things are moving in a positive direction. But they're going to fight to the death and wait till financial catastrophe, and you have to change. And I guess the purpose of our shows is the more people that understand the way that we need to go, the better when that time comes.
Very good. And, a year or two ago when I asked Bernanke whether gold was money, he pondered a bit. It seemed like a long period of time, but he pondered. He came up and he said, no, it isn't. And in one way, he's right. Gold is not being used on a day-to-day basis as money. That's sort of been set aside. But I made the point to him, yes, but the central banks all hold gold to some degree, and some central banks are accumulating a lot of gold, like China and Russia. So gold is still around for money. So the question is, are the cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, are they money? And I would say under current conditions, they have not qualified yet as money. But they're equivalent to Federal Reserve notes. Federal Reserve notes, from our definition of money, don't qualify as money either. They're just certificates of debt. They're notes. It's a promise for the government to pay. And the government, as far back as 1933, broke that promise. They don't pay. So it was shifting over those years. So we work with a fiat currency. And I think that so far the cryptocurrencies have not filled the gap and has become the real money of the world. But in time, it will be sorted out. It will be just like for years through the Cold War, we were trying to threaten and lecture communism of its failure and worried about a nuclear holocaust. But it failed. It didn't work. So if you have freedom out there and there's competition, we'll find out rather quickly, which is the best money. And if times have changed, if 6,000 years of history have been canceled or they have been modified, we would soon find out. But right now, we don't have sound money any place in the world. But I think it should be a goal. But the ultimate goal is to live in a free society. Chris, I want to thank you very much for being with us today in this conversation about money.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul.
And I want to thank the viewers for tuning in today. This is an important issue and something that fascinates me, but I think it's also an important issue for the cause of liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.